Coding the Future, David's Equation. At the Massachusetts Institute of Technology (MIT), studying electrical engineering, David Chen was dozing off at his laptop in the campus cafeteria. David was working on a magnetic launch system that would radically reduce the cost of launching into orbit. His dream was to see satellites and cargo launched into space not with disposable rockets but with a giant electromagnetic catapult. However, the energy efficiency part of this equation had him stumped. It required far too much energy for practical application. One evening, David unwittingly posted a technical poster summarizing his calculations on an online forum titled Future Space Technologies. His intent was to seek help, but the comments below were mostly mocking. Another one who doesn't know physics. However, the next morning, David's inbox contained an email with just one word: interesting. Sender, Elon Musk, SpaceX. David checked the email repeatedly. In the content, Musk noted that David's quantum flux compression method in the magnetic launch concept was a brilliant point that could solve the energy storage problem. Musk invited David to SpaceX headquarters in California. A meeting in California. A few days later, David stood in front of the tallest, most futuristic building he'd ever seen. The hum of SpaceX's rocket assembly facility echoed from inside. Musk greeted David right on the workshop floor. Around them, massive parts of Falcon rockets gleamed. After shaking David's hand, Musk walked straight to a rocket engine. David, ideas that will change the world don't need to be perfect. They just need to be radical enough to work. Your magnetic catapult idea, this rewrites the financial math of space travel. But as a rocket engineer, let me tell you a truth: theory scatters easily in the wind outside the lab. David replied with a trembling voice, I can't get the energy efficiency above 50%. That makes the project commercially impossible. Musk nodded. Yes, you're stuck there. But I'm interested in that superconducting coil design you presented in the poster. If you can turn it into a real, scalable prototype right here on this factory floor, then we'll talk. Beyond an internship, Musk offered David not an ordinary intern position, but a deal with the title, Senior Entrepreneurial Engineer. For a year, David would use SpaceX's financial resources and engineering teams to build a mini-test platform for the magnetic launch system. This isn't an internship, David. This is an offer to risk your entire career. If you fail, you'll have wasted millions of dollars worth of materials in this facility. But if you succeed, you'll have lowered the cargo cost for the first manned mission to Mars. David felt the weight of the moment. Sleeplessness, doubts, mocking comments, it all suddenly made sense. This was more than solving an equation, it was a chance to turn the impossible into practical. Deal, said David, his voice no longer trembling. Where do you want me to start? Musk smiled. He shrugged, from first principles. You always start there. And remember, David, if something is important enough, it's worth trying even if the odds are against you. That day, David left the security of university life behind and stepped onto the floor of a massive rocket factory to solve the equation of humanity's space future. I hope you enjoyed this longer version of David's story. It became a deeper tale with David's career risk and Musk's direct, challenging confrontation. Do you want any changes or a continuation? New reality, 3 months of fire testing. David Chen's first month at SpaceX was not a dream, but a fire test. Musk's given title of Senior Entrepreneurial Engineer meant being thrown into the head of a heated lab, massive metal parts, and an engineering team that didn't know sleep. David's task was to build a 10-meter mini-test rail prototype to prove the magnetic launch concept. David had to focus on the weakest point of his theory, the energy efficiency issue. Quantum flux compression theoretically amplified the magnetic field, but in reality, the thermal runaway problem in superconducting coils brought the system close to melting with every attempt. The first 2 months passed with exploding power sources and melting insulation materials. David sat at his desk, face in his hands, staring at failure reports. The team was restless, financial pressure was mounting. Musk visited the test platform every 2 weeks in person, asking the same short, sharp question each time: when do we push faster? Critical crossroads and Musk's intervention. Toward the end of the 3rd month, David faced a critical decision. Traditional liquid nitrogen cooling systems couldn't keep the coils at a low enough temperature. David had to try a new approach, using helium-based cryogenic pumps. This would add another $1 million to the prototype's cost and completely exhaust the budget. The next morning, David was called to a meeting to present this expensive and risky change to Musk. On the meeting table, the failure graph of David's prototype glowed with a downward trend. Musk looked directly into David's eyes. "David, this is a gamble. The helium pump will either accelerate this project or end it. If you fail, you might end up just making coffee in this facility for a year." David took a deep breath. "Mr. Musk, I've checked the theory countless times. The problem isn't the theory, it's the applied physics. The temperature needed for the superconductor to reach maximum flux capacity is impossible with the current system. Helium pumps are the only way to bring coil resistance close to zero. If we want to launch rockets to space cheaper, we have to rewrite the first rule." Musk watched David silently for a long time. The doubt in his eyes slowly turned into a shining approval. "All right, David. We're adding another $1 million to the budget. But know this is your last chance. I want this rail to launch our first satellite in 2 weeks. Failure is not an option, David. But not trying is the real failure. First success." David and his team spent the next 14 days working non-stop. Helium pumps were installed, coils were rebuilt, and the system was balanced at low temperatures. On the final test day, David waited trembling in front of the control panel. In front of him was the 10-meter rail and at its end a small, 10-kilogram test payload. "Initiate countdown," said David, his voice echoing from the control panel speakers. 5, 4. Everyone in the lab held their breath. 3, 2, 1, launch. With a massive hum, the entire test rail glowed with a purple light. The payload was thrust with incredible g-forces and hit the targeted net exactly at the end of the rail. David looked at the monitor. Efficiency, 78%. This was still a low percentage for commercial viability, but it meant the theory worked. David's theory had turned into reality for the first time. Musk approached from the back of the room, to David's side. For the first time David saw on his face a mix of satisfaction and pride. He placed his hand on David's shoulder. "Good job, David. 78%. That means the game's on. Now, you know the problem. How do we get that 78% to 90%? Let's get back to work." David smiled. The first hurdle was overcome. Now it was time to make the impossible routine. "I hope this version with more technical tension pleased you, as you wanted to extend it. We can also write David's struggle to reach the next goal of 90% efficiency. Shall we continue?" The 78% wall and blue sky thinking. The 6 weeks following the first successful launch were like getting lost in a labyrinth around the 10-meter test rail for David. 78% efficiency had created initial excitement in the media and inside SpaceX, but in Musk's words, it was just 20 steps past the starting line. David's goal was to reduce the cost per ton of cargo launch from thousands of dollars to hundreds, and that was impossible without 90% efficiency. David knew that most of the efficiency losses came from magnetic resonance flux leakage. As the payload left the rail, the instantaneous dispersion of the magnetic field turned valuable energy into heat with every launch. The team tried optimizing the coil geometry and propulsion algorithm thousands of times, but couldn't get above 80%. One evening, David sat on the lab roof, staring at the lights of Los Angeles. The more he tried to solve an engineering problem, the more he realized he was losing his ability to imagine. A quote from Musk came to mind: "Sometimes, to solve the problem, you need to go higher instead of deeper." Solution: quantum shield. The next day, David came to the team with a radical idea that shocked them. He set aside traditional engineering solutions, better coils, stronger thrusters, and targeted the payload itself. The idea was, to prevent magnetic field dispersion, apply a thin, active quantum shield around the test payload that would block the field from leaking out. This would trap the magnetic flux between the rail and the payload, reducing energy loss at the last moment to zero. The team was skeptical. This was a doctoral thesis project combining theoretical physics and advanced materials science that would take several years. But David knew it was the only way. He presented this idea to Musk at the meeting a week later. Musk fidgeted with his leg while listening to David's presentation. When it ended, the silence was long. "David," said Musk, his voice ice-cold, "this is a crazy idea. If it fails, it buries the entire project. Why don't we just wait another year and develop this shield in 5 years?" David stood tall. There was no doubt or fear in his eyes. Only vision. "Mr. Musk," he said, "we can wait 7 months for a rocket to reach Mars, but we can't wait 5 years for 90% efficiency that will reduce launch costs. Sustainable space exploration must start today. This shield turns magnetic launch into a spaceport technology, not just a lab experiment. We have to take this risk because it's important enough." Musk leaned back slowly. The corners of his eyes crinkled slightly. "Nice speech, David. I guess you've shown me what you want. I'm giving you 8 weeks. Either this shield works, or we pull the plug on the project. Now, go make something impossible no longer." Final launch. David worked with his team for 18 hours a day over 8 weeks on the shield's design and integration. The shield consisted of a magnetic coating and reinforced graphene layers. Finally, test day arrived. David stood in the control room in front of Musk and SpaceX's top engineers. On the rail was the final adjusted test payload. "Initiate countdown," said David, his voice tired but determined. 5, 4. Musk stood with arms crossed, brows furrowed. 3, 2. 1, launch. This time the thrust was much quieter and smoother than previous attempts. Instead of a blue electrical burst, the payload shot toward the target without a visible magnetic field spread. David held his breath and looked at the monitor. The efficiency indicator rose slowly, 85%. 88%. 90.1. There was a moment of silence in the control room, followed by loud, spontaneous applause. David felt all the pressure lift from his shoulders and smiled comfortably in that facility for the first time. Musk didn't join the applause. He walked calmly to David's side. His face had a mysterious expression. "David," he said, extending his hand, "perfect. Now, how much time do you need to turn this 10-meter rail into a 10-kilometer launch line?" David shook Musk's hand. He straightened his shoulders and forgot his fatigue. He was no longer just an engineer, he was the architect of the future of space transportation. "Let's start right away, Mr. Musk," he said. "Everything we need is here."